Bum 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 literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. And welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the occasional literature podcast where we talk about books. And this time, we're talking about spooky books. Halloween is upon us once again, which means we've got special guest with us, MBT Yu-Gi-Oh!
Hi. How's everybody doing today? Y'all having fun? Y'all enjoying having read a book?
You have it? Yeah.
What was that like?
You know, a lot of people make the joke that, like, a Yu-Gi-Tuber trying to start a literature podcast was doomed to fail because Yu-Gi-Oh! Players don't read.
Not a lot of crossover appeal, but, I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a lot of general appeal anyway. Yeah. So, what were you expecting?
Yeah, I just branch out, maybe I can dip my toe into BookTube, take away from some of the popular BookTubers.
BookTube.
But yeah, getting back on topic, today we're here to talk about a spooky book for our Halloween. Previously, we've done Stephen King, we've done the collective works of H.P. Lovecraft and people inspired by him, and this time, we decided to read something from this century.
Yeah, no, we've done a lot of really funny ones from way back when, and rather than be like, hey, I've got some really prescient insight about Frankenstein.
Ooh.
I think that I liked being able to read something written, in the last 100 years.
Yeah. And we've been looking around for, newer horror stuff, but it's really hard to find. Horror really has kind of faded away from books, I feel like. It's much more of a movie and video game kind of thing, all the mascot horror stuff. But we did manage to find one.
You could say that, Stephen King ruined horror writing, but, I would say Scott Cawthorne ruined horror, period, right? We almost read Five Nights at Freddy's, the movie novelization, but we elected not to.
You should know there's a whole series of novels around Five Nights at Freddy's.
You know what's awful? I did know that. It's the silver ones, right? The silver eyes, yeah.
I think that's just the first one, and there's a whole series of them.
A horror mystery novel. Freddy did it, right? Who else could it be?
It was the purple guy. But yeah. Long story short, we're reading a new book, and it's not the Five Nights at Freddy's stuff, even though algorithmically that probably would have done really well.
Yeah.
That or reading a bunch of Goosebumps. But instead, we read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia.
So
I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, this one came highly, highly recommended to me by my wife, who reads books. I try to read books. If you go to my Twitter, every end of year, I put up a little thing about the books I read. I think I'm going to stop because last year I read John Scalzi's The Kaiju Preservation Society, and I called it soy, and he showed up in the comments to defend it. And I don't want that to happen again.
I mean, that's the interesting thing I found about reviewing modern books. We did a Warhammer book earlier this year, and the author appeared in the comments. He was like, hey, I'm glad you enjoyed it. By the way, here, let me answer a couple of your questions for you.
That's crazy. It's just wild. I like books as an artifact that, if the author says something, I get to be like, you didn't mean that, you stupid moron. But no, this one comes courtesy of my wife, who reads a lot more than me and basically gives me book recommendations all the time. And I did ask her, I was like, okay, so there's horror in this, right? It's not going to just be the real demon is colonialism. Yeah. And while that is, still involved, there's horror in it.
Yeah, there is, but it's not as spooky as I would compared to the Stephen King Lovecraft stuff. This isn't pants-shittingly, existential horror. It's more like a thriller.
I think that there is a pretty good comparison to Lovecraft, because a lot of Lovecraft's work is just there's really no big spooky jump scare style horror. And, there is another parallel in that, this one you're scared of white people, and the Lovecraft ones, you're scared of everyone but white people, right?
It's reverse Lovecraft. No, there's one good white guy in this. He's cool. He's a little dweeby nerd guy.
Yeah, sort of. We'll talk about that, but
before we get into that, we should go ahead and give our spoiler-free thoughts. That's usually the way we go, is spoiler-free thoughts first, and then we'll just jump into discussion and assume either you've read it or you're not going to read this. Yeah, so go ahead, MBT, you start us off. Let us know what you thought with as few spoilers as possible.
I loved it. I thought it was quite good. I think there is stuff that I disliked that I'm sure that we will I always want to preface these where I actually like them with I loved it, because I'm now going to spend an hour talking shit on it, and I don't want people to come away with the wrong understanding, which is that I didn't like the work. I did. I thought it was quite good. The author is like a fan of, a student of, influenced by like H.G. Wells' work, and it really wears it on its sleeve. It's not subtle whatsoever, but I didn't need it to be subtle. It does a fantastic job, in my opinion, of spending about a half to maybe a little more than half of the book in this weird zone of kind of introducing you to the background anxiety of the work before the last 100 pages really picks up, and like from that point on it is a thriller.
It's, in a way, it reminds me, not to cut you off too much here, but have you ever seen, I think, The Descent? No. It's a movie about a bunch of women who, they go caving, they're gonna go explore a cave, and it starts off just like the horror of being with a bunch of people you don't like. And then they get trapped in the cave, and it becomes the horror of, like, oh, you're trapped in a cave. And then someone falls, 100 feet and breaks their leg. And it's, this body horror of, trying to get someone out, and they're, screaming in pain. And then in the last half hour, they go down into another part, and they find, evil cannibal monsters that are living underground that are attacking them. And this kind of compares it to that, where it's it's a horror novel with supernatural elements, but the first 3/4 of the book is just
there is a lot of time spent being reinforcing. Again, this book is not particularly subtle, but reinforcing that this individual is not welcome here, does not belong here, and there are these vague psychosexual undertones to their existence there. The only other person there that is not a European import is exclusively there to provide children for someone, and then after things start happening, it's oh no,
things are way worse than you thought. This was just dinner with your racist grandparents, and then it turns out that there's actually a Lovecraftian deity involved.
And what's actually quite interesting about it is, once it becomes clear that there is a Lovecraftian deity involved, all of that background anxiety about you don't belong here, you aren't welcome here, is completely turned on its head. It becomes, we need you here, you have to be here. But of course there is a reason not to be there, which is you're gonna get killed by the spooky ghost. I guess if I would say anything about the work, I like the pacing. I like how everyone is described. I like that the ending is a little ambiguous. I wish the author would trust the reader just a little bit more. There's a section where they're speaking about a mushroom, and it's clearly meant to be exploration of how sexuality plays into this alienation and anxiety, and then the character is it didn't take Freud to figure out that this played on her insecurities and sexual anxieties. And I was all right, we could have gotten that. We're not morons, we didn't stumble out of the...
it is a modern book.
Yeah, we didn't stumble out of the Goosebumps
modern
dimension.
Audiences.
Yeah, no, I mean, probably the people who are reading this are between Five Nights at Freddy's novels, so maybe it's important, but I feel like I say this constantly with books that we read. I do wish that they had a little restraint in terms of telling us what everything was. But outside of that, I did really appreciate it.
A little harder to analyze things when they come out and say stuff overtly.
Well... we'll talk about that.
So yeah, overall you'd say, though, enjoyable. You have your nitpicks, obviously. Everything is going to have nitpicks.
Oh, and I'm gonna nitpick.
Yeah, I'm gonna nitpick the hell out of this book. I think that is a good idea. I will go ahead and say I did enjoy this book. This book is more good than it is bad, but I feel like I had probably a little bit more flaws to it. Just to elaborate here, normally I don't like to give straight up scores for a book. It feels a little reductive just to be this is a 5. Books are a little bit more... I mean, all art. The way I see it, art basically has 4 goals that it can do. It can either try to be entertaining, it can reflect some aspect of real life, it can be really technically impressive, or it can be technically, experimental. It can try to push new bounds with the medium. And most works will do, all of these things a little bit to some extent. But a work of art, to me, is great if it succeeds particularly well in, one or more of those goals. Like, you don't have to do all of them, but if you could do one of them really, really well, then it's like, oh, this is fantastic.
I'm gonna attack you.
Oh.
This is... Yeah, no, keep going, but this is too mechanized for me.
Oh, I love mechanization. I just love to narrow down all the minutia of little things. But through that lens, Mexican Gothic, it doesn't really, succeed at any of those things particularly well. But it also doesn't fail at them. On a technical level, it works. The pacing is well, the characters are well written, there's no, spelling errors or anything like that. It works, it gets the job done. It's not particularly experimental, but most things aren't. It seemed much more interested in, the story content, on being, an entertaining gothic horror, while also communicating a certain perspective about the world. Like you said, it kind of touches on colonialism, on the experience of, being a woman, especially in the 1950s. But it didn't do those in a way that I'll always remember forever, right? The spookiness wasn't this haunting, nightmarish thing. It was just, kind of thrilling. And the commentary is not something that has changed my outlook on the world. It's just sort of yeah, I understand colonialism. So overall, as much as I don't want to give things a number, because this is okay at everything, it's just a 6. It's a 6 or a 7. Closer to a 7 than a 5. It's
going to be so funny when you're I'm giving this a light 7, and I'm giving this a mid 7, and we're going to fight for an hour about it. I'm already Hardleg, I am going to tear you apart, you monster.
Yeah.
But our difference of opinion is going to end up amounting to a 0.5 on a scale that doesn't exist.
Yeah. That's what you gotta do. That's the fun of talking about this. People don't understand. You don't just read books, for the sake of reading books. You read it to have discussions with friends, to have a fun time.
Yeah, yell at each other.
That's why at the end, I assume you did the paper book and not the audio book, right?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I did the paper book.
Okay. I was just asking because at the back of my version, there's actually book club discussion points.
All right,
where they're specifically here's the things you should talk about.
I will go out on a limb here. This is actually pretty common in books that have been written recently, is to have discussions or a book club discussion talking points, and then maybe an interview with the author. I hate this shit. Stop putting book club discussion points in the... Make people think. Make them think of their own book club discussion point. And also, if you show up to a book club and they go, okay, what discussion point do you have? And you read the one out of the back of the book, they're going to assassinate you. What the fuck do you think is going to happen? They have the same book as you.
The thing is, I was open to it. I was at first I was well, that's a little presumptuous, but I'm I'll keep an open mind. I'll look at it. And the first question on there is who was your favorite character? And I wanted to slam my head into a wall. That is the most basic bitch ass question you could possibly ask. Has nothing to do with the content of the story. It's just, who did you like? It's
what do you think the author's purpose was in writing this book? A question that I do not give a fuck about. I don't care. Well, what do I care about the motivations of the author? Come on now.
In almost every case, it's at least partially, I wanted money.
Yes. And, with the exception of John Scalzi, who shows up in my mentions to call me mean for saying his book sucked, the author, to me, it's just a figment of my imagination. This could be written by ChatGPT for all I fucking care. Are you ready to get into the spoiler version?
Yeah, I guess with that out of the way, we should real quick I recommend this book.
Me too.
If you're interested in it, check it out. It's a short, easy read.
Easy read.
Yeah.
It'll take you 4 hours tops, 300 pages. Fucking crank it out, baby.
It'll keep your attention. Even we talked about the slow buildup. Even during that, it was never boring.
Oh no, I was blazing through it.
Yeah.
And then the last ones, I found myself skimming paragraphs because I was so excited about what was happening. And then I had to be no, I have to go back and read the fucking paragraph.
Yeah. I will say I got I read it at a fairly decent pace, a couple chapters a night, and then once I got to the end, I just stayed up an extra hour and just read the whole rest of the book. The end really just
I took a 45-minute shit to read the end.
But yeah, so go check this out. If that being said, let's get into the spoiler section. Let's talk about all the cool themes and stuff.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's do just a quick overview of the plot, so you all kind of we're all on the same page. If you decided you didn't want to read it, but you still want to listen to the rest of the fucking podcast for some reason, I don't know.
Do we really?
Maybe you're some kind of freak.
Do we really want to indulge those people? If they didn't read the book, fuck you. You're gonna be lost.
No, I'll indulge you. We can't afford not to indulge people. I've seen the views on these videos.
Fine.
Anyway, so the short of it is a sort of independent style girl living in the 1950s in Mexico City is a little flighty, I guess I would say is the word. That makes me sound like a Victorian man describing like an insolent young child demanding too much food, but she's a little flighty.
She's gone through like several college degrees where like she wanted to be a chemist and then she wanted to be an anthropologist and then she wanted to be this.
You can already see why this book is popular is because every flighty broad I know has that exact same path. They just stay in school for 40 years and they're like, I'm getting a different degree this time. No, she gets a disturbing letter from her cousin who has just been married to a man that they don't really know too well called Virgil Doyle.
And he is such a Virgil.
He's such a fucking Virgil. At her father's insistence, she goes to see if anything's wrong, finds that the cousin is living in it's
like an old, run-down, Gothic Victorian mansion.
It's a huge mansion that it's kind of fallen into a state of disrepair, but not for want of work. It's just like, it's aged, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And she's introduced to a very prim and proper European family who made a bunch of wealth hundreds of years ago off of a mine that's on the property. A silver mine until
Not even hundreds of years ago. This was like 50 years ago or whatever. It's like the previous generation was very wealthy.
Yeah. And
then the revolution happened.
The revolution happened, as those are wont to do during periods of income inequality. And the torrential rains that accompanied it kind of flooded the mine and the money kind of dried up. And they're all kind of existing off the fumes in this house. And she speaks with the sister, finds out that the sister is very mentally disturbed about something. She thinks it's kind of the suffocating air of this family's incredibly proper, hard discipline European values, or they're like...
Yeah, well, we should mention the fact that this mansion is not just like in the middle of a town or whatever. It's like at the top of a huge mountain, way outside of town, where they're like, it's a 20-minute drive to get anywhere. Yeah. So it's very isolating. And there's like a graveyard in the backyard.
It's always misty.
Yeah. I could see being stuck in like one area, and they're like, oh, she could go to church on Sunday if she wanted to. But other than that, you're just stuck with like your husband and his weird old prim proper family that's just like no talking during dinner.
Yeah. The main character starts having kind of visions and dreams of the ages past in this house, in which it's revealed that one member of the family went on a ballistic rampage and killed a whole bunch of people. And then it's revealed that person actually was completely correct to do so because it turns out the entire family is actually just demonic.
They're just infected by mushrooms.
The house is connected to a network of mushrooms that forms a miasma that has the power to control people and enter dreams and stuff and manifest ghosts called the Gloom.
Yeah.
It's the result of a series of life-lengthening experimentations taken by the patriarch of the family that have enabled him to live forever by transferring his consciousness into the Gloom and then out to a child that has the same type of blood as him.
Yeah.
Meaning that the family is just incested to shit as well.
Very much so.
They intend to keep her and the cousin in the family to harden the blood, but also to deliver viable offspring because they can't anymore, by which the patriarch can continue his eternal life. And they burn down the house and get to leave with the soft-spoken cattle-style member of the family, Francis.
Yeah, Francis, the little nerdy guy with a heart of gold, who knows Spanish.
He does know Spanish. That was... This book makes you want to learn Spanish. You go, oh, fuck, I gotta know Spanish. If my house turns against me, that's all I'm gonna be able to do.
So yeah, now that we've got the story out of the way, I did have a series of talking points. Mm-hmm. Some of these are things I came up with. Some of these were things we actually had several readers this time who read along with us, and they had things they wanted to ask us about to discuss. Mm-hmm. So I just want to give a shout out real quickly to Frankly, who's reading all this stuff, including Will of Time, and also someone you may know, SophieApparently.
Oh shit, she read this?
Yeah.
Sophie's whip smart. I am excited to hear what she has to say.
I think she joined, she's like the only person who's joined the Patreon just to join to the book club.
Sophie's great.
Rest her soul.
She's a delight.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just, obviously, we're here on Halloween. This is the scary episode. But I didn't find this to be particularly all that frightening. And this is something Sophie was like, I went into this. She didn't want to read like horror stories. She's like, I don't like scary stuff. But this was actually really easy to get through because it wasn't all that scary.
Yeah, I guess I would probably echo that sentiment. There is a lot of it is a very anxious book, especially early.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension.
Yeah, but even in being anxious, it's not that bad. There's a lot of like unspoken rules from these people that, oh my God, what if I violate an unspoken rule? The main character has no problem doing that. And there's pretty much no consequences for doing so either. So whenever she like would fuck up the rules, I'd be like, it's just the rules. What are you gonna do? That's just the way it is.
There's always kind of this unspoken like threat that they handle really well. Where like Virgil is this big, tall, statuesque, square-jawed guy, and when she does something inappropriate, he like looms over her, and it's like, if I wasn't a gentleman, I would beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
She's like, but you are a gentleman, right? He's like,
who knows?
For now.
Yeah. I will say,
for now. I mean, we are isolated in the middle of a mansion, in the middle of nowhere. Like, who would know?
It is a very strange type of fear because it starts by being like, well, it is certainly the case that we are in the middle of nowhere. But these people, they live by a code. They're like proper English people. They're not going to like hurt me or kill me or anything. Yeah. And then it becomes clear they will definitely hurt and kill me. Yeah. And so for the first part, while it is a little prickly to read, you don't get the sense that anyone is really in any like immediate mortal danger from each other. Just the danger of like being made to look inferior, right?
Yeah. The danger really is just kind of like leaving the cousin behind that's like so beloved, and like they have this weird doctor who says everything's fine, and he's like, nah, you need the treatment of staying indoors and getting as little activity as possible.
That doctor is so good, by the way. Like, no motivations whatsoever. He's like, I just love doing evil.
Yeah, I just love doing... That's what we should mention. The story takes place in the 1950s. Yeah. Which doesn't play, like, a huge role, other than, obviously, they don't have, like, cell phones and stuff. But that does kind of play into, back then, there was still that leftover ideas about, like, sanitariums and stuff, where they're like, oh, if you're feeling bad, that's because of bad air. You shouldn't go outside,
This one's crazy because it is bad air. But it is not a particularly scary one, but it does get real disgusting, especially at the end. Yeah. There's a lot of like
body horror.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like sexual assault, like kind of permeating the entire thing. Like there's like 2 or 3 scenes in which it's implied that it's like about to happen. But pretty much everything that happens during the thing contains the implicit threat of like, what if someone attacked me? Like, what if someone like took advantage of me and attacked me? And it feels like it is very good at communicating that implicit fear that I think all women have.
Yeah, that kind of just feels like, I will say this did a pretty good job of like putting you in the headspace of what it was like to be a woman back then. Mm-hmm. I remember there's one thing that's particularly stuck out to me where Virgil is kind of like, condemning Noemi for being like, oh, you just turn on your charms. This isn't to like get Francis to do what you like. And she makes this note of like, well, yeah, of course I do. Like, you want to be nice and be liked. Unlike you, I can't be like a stone cold asshole to everyone and somehow be respected. If you're a woman and you do that, you're just a bitch and no one likes you.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that like, she is a character who's very in control of kind of her own sexuality, and that's why kind of the scariest portions of the book have to do with like someone taking it away from her. Yeah. And, it's basically the only weapon she has throughout this thing because, boy, holy shit, these people are awful.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say also, keeping on with the horror thing, the few parts that were really effective to me was there was a point in the middle where you get past the tension of, like, the scariness of being in this unfamiliar, unwelcoming place. And they start to hint at, like, she's in the graveyard, and suddenly there's a fog, and, like, you can see a figure standing in the distance, but you're not sure if it's her imagination. She's like, I'm just going to get out of here, but, like, the fog is so thick, she can't actually, like, find her way out of the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
That and like some of the dream sequences where she's like sleepwalking and the house is like this organic thing where like there's blood vessels in the walls and it's pumping, and this idea of like if I talk the house can literally hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And then especially when you get like woken up from sleepwalking, you know, you wake up from a nightmare and instead of being in bed you're standing there and there's a person holding your hand like, Noemi, you need to go back to bed.
That is.
And that they really nail that utter disorientation of suddenly going from the dream to the real world. And then for me, it almost felt like once the second shoe finally dropped, like once the horror actually came out, and you're like, oh, these are like supernatural fungus people who are like controlling us through this weird body horror spore stuff. It almost like took the wind out of the sails, because then you knew what you were up against, and it was no longer like the horror of the unknown. It was no longer creepy. Now it's like, how do we defeat this known enemy?
When Howard vomits in her mouth, I'm like, oh, thank God, everyone's actually evil. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Felt like I was fucking living on the edge for 200 pages. Oh, thank God, they're demons. They're demons. Don't worry, folks.
They're just demon people. And there is one thing, I compared this a little bit to Lovecraft, but I think there's one thing that this book kind of missed from Lovecraft, which was like, you know, he was so effective at writing horror because he was scared of fucking everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when he talks about underwater stuff, like these big tentacled squid fish people or whatever, it's because he's writing from the perspective of someone who thinks fish are fucking disgusting and wants nothing to do with them. But here, they replace that with this idea of the mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, mushrooms are something I feel like it's really easy to write horror about. Because mushrooms are like, you know, they're not vegetables. They're not like...
weird.
Yeah, they're very weird. They're very alien.
They're alive. A significant amount of them look exactly the same as each other, but one will kill you and one won't. That literally happens in this, right? He's like, ooh, this is an evil one. And then, you know, they throw spores everywhere. You can't really see them. They grow on dead people. They're gross.
Yeah.
I like them, though.
They can glow. They have mold. Yeah, but there's always this element of, like, fascination with them that stops them from being truly, like, horrifying. They're always kind of, like, oddly beautiful in a way. Which is, I did read the questions at the end and stuff, where they have, like, an interview with the author. Mm-hmm. And they're like, why mushrooms? She's like, I like mushrooms. They're really neat. And I'm like... That's where you failed. You can't write a horror story about something you think is cool and fun. You gotta write about stuff that's horrifying to you.
I mean...
Otherwise, it won't quite come across as well.
I have a deep respect for mushrooms, but I recognize they are evil. Yeah, it's not a particularly spooky book. By the time that spooky things start happening, you're pretty much prepared for the worst. So when the worst comes to pass, it is almost a relief. It's like, ugh. Thank God we can stop existing in this weird halfway point, and we can just be like, okay, there's aliens or something.
Yeah. It's weird because, like, you know, like we said, they wait until the last third of the book. So you think, like, oh, it's almost over. And yet it still feels almost like it happened too soon. Mm-hmm. Like they could have drawn it out a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. But either way, it was still enjoyable. It just wasn't like, you know, the master of horror stuff that we've come to expect from Halloween.
From Goosebump.
Okay, so next question I got on here, next discussion point, specifically comes from Frankly, and he asked, what did you think of Noemi as a thriller protagonist? Like, did her decisions make sense to you? Was there ever a point where you're like, get the hell out of here, what are you doing? Because that's the thing when you're talking about a thriller that can make it go from tense to frustrating, is when the characters make these awful bad decisions.
Well, I didn't really disagree with any of her decisions, I guess. It is weird. I think the moment that she needs to leave is immediately upon entering the high place, but you know, what are they gonna do, you know?
Did we mention that the mansion is called High Place?
The High Place. That's crazy, right?
Yeah. It's not the most inspired name, but it you know, it works.
The thing I guess I would say, the thing I didn't understand about her decision making is she would like fuck up and break a rule, and then everyone would be like, don't do that again. And then she would do it again. But I didn't find myself disagreeing with it because I was like, yeah, what are they gonna do?
Yeah.
Like, sure, break it again. Who fucking cares?
It actually worked pretty well to like ratchet up the tension because you're kind of like, I understand why she's breaking the rules again, but there's also this understanding of like they're losing their patience with her. They might snap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's, for the most part, it does a pretty good job. I actually thought it did pretty well up until like the night before she left, where she's like, I'll spend one more night, and I'm like, I would have gotten out of there. I would have left at this point. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, despite the fact that they do try to humanize the cousin a bit and try to make her more of a character and not just like someone who needs to be saved, I don't think I ever felt exactly that connection where you're like, no, I must stay for her sake. Especially when it feels like she could have just gone back to Mexico City and like gotten her dad.
This one's weird, yeah, because logistically, you never get the sense that much improves with the cousin. The cousin almost doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
You know, nothing ever really improves with the cousin. And the reason she doesn't go back, especially early, is like, oh, then I won't get my master's degree. But it's like, you already don't care too much about that shit. Like, you're popping between degrees really quickly. So it's strange. It feels like she stays in the house because she's like, well, I want to find out what's going on in the house, which I do too.
Yeah.
And I appreciate. But as a result, it means like all of the... It means that like there's never really any stakes that they're going to kick her out. There's never really any stakes to trying anything. Because worst case scenario, it's like, you know, what do we miss out on? Not much.
Yeah. I will say it is also, now that we talk about the cousin, it's weird how, you know, she spent most of the story being like a non-character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was just kind of like the crazy cousin who used to be nice, and she does like a couple little plot point related things.
Yeah, there's a couple sections where like she'll walk into the room and the cousin will faint or something.
Yeah. She writes like that little letter where it's like, get me this drink. I need it.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Tincture?
The tincture.
Tincture? Yeah. Never heard of that.
I do want to talk pretty extensively about that.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I just wanted to mention it's funny how at the end, like, after being a non-character for most of the story, the cousin is then the one who stabs the most people in this book.
Yeah, she's like, I was spending all that time gathering the strength to effectively stab.
To fucking kill everyone in this household.
Yeah, and she does a great job of it too.
Yeah.
Really can't recommend her enough.
Yeah, if you need something that's stabbed, I mean, I don't even remember her name. She's just the cousin.
Catalina, I think is her name.
Catalina, okay. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of weird because I could almost see the author at the end being like, you know, well, I don't want to have this character who has like no agency. She's got to be the one who takes out like Virgil. But then she also is the one who takes out Doyle. And then it leaves Noemi with like, well, what did she really do? She set something on fire, I guess.
And for that, we love her.
Yeah. Burning down the house. Talking heads would be proud. But yeah, you said you wanted to talk about the tincture?
Yeah, so, okay, well, I kind of want to talk about sexuality in general.
Does that have to do with the tincture?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, does it?
No, so it's very weird in that, like, I think a lot of people are like, you know, does it matter that this takes place in like the 1950s and stuff? And I understand being like that because the woman in this is pretty
progressive for the 1950s, pretty modern.
Yeah, she's a little woke, but for me it's like this story is really just about like human sexuality and shit, right? The all encompassing evil force is like a penis, right? And you know, it's no mistake that Francis has this fascination with dicks. Or the dick stand-in, right? A significant amount of Noemi's dreams are about the fraught relationship of like dominance, control, colonialism, and sex, right? In so many ways, Virgil represents this just like the new face of old money.
Yeah.
And she is endlessly having dreams about being dominated by him, which you later find out is that he has been inducing these and also can go into dreams and shit.
The spores have the ability to kind of like affect your brain chemistry and, you know, play on the things that you think are kind of exciting become very exciting.
And in so many ways, the central conflict for the Doyles is that they can no longer have sex the way they need to get what they want. You know, it is a very psychosexual problem. You know, we have to find someone who to us is exotic and new, is like the literal phrases that they use for these people. The dark sexuality of, the untamed, blah, 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 insanely racist shit. And the end result is that they will give birth to children that can then be eaten in exchange for eternal life, or vassals for what is in essence like a microcosm of patriarchy. Yeah. And this is really interesting to me, because it's like, in what way is what's happening here functionally different than like an actual real world, like a clan of insanely wealthy people, right? They don't eat the baby in a literal sense, but they immediately indoctrinate them to these rules. And though the rules don't offer them like a connection to this generational web of memory facilitation, they do give them like access to the generational power of inherited wealth. And the end result is like about these babies and shit is she has that one dream where the woman births like a seed pod from which is born like a snake in the shape of a mushroom. I was of the impression that the tincture wasn't a potion that decreases the hold of the gloom over you. I was of the impression that the tincture was just an abortifacient. Abortifacient? That's the word.
I don't know either of those words.
It's a drug that induces like miscarriage. And
okay.
By that mechanism, you can sever both the literal link to like the patrilineal generational system of control, but also you can, within the logic of the story, prevent the birth of the child used to propagate this control. And that's kind of the direction that I thought it was going. I was like, that's a cool idea. And, that I don't think that means that that's necessarily not what it is, but within the context of the story, it's just a potion that works for our purposes.
It breaks the hold of the mushrooms. Whether or not it represents something, it's kind of up to the eye of
the hold, like also the hold of the mushrooms. Yeah, breaks is the hold of could be anything. Could mean literally anything.
No, it is interesting because, like, the way you looked at it is a lot more, like, personal than the way I kind of interpreted it. Because I originally had some notes talking about the sexuality, but it always felt really problematic, really kind of mixed messages in there, with the whole idea of, like, there's this fear of sexual assault, but the fear is almost like that she would enjoy it. They talk a lot about how Virgil can like manipulate her mind to be like, oh, this is what you want. This is pleasurable, which is like, it's really kind of messy.
It's fraught,
but I feel like that makes a lot more sense if the sexuality is a stand-in for like colonialism in general. This idea of like, yeah, this rich white guy is going to come here and he's going to open the silver mine and he's going to make all your lives better. And yeah, you're going to work for him and it's going to be awful, but you're going to love it because you're going to be rich. You're going to be part of this big new thing and you're going to love having these colonizers dominate over you. It's going to be something that you and your children will actually want.
And it's the mythos of colonialism that still exists to this day. Is like you see people being like, oh, you know what? Actually, it was very good for the colonized nations that they were able to experience like civilization.
Yeah.
It just in the same way that it's like, this is an awful, thing, sexual assault, but what if you actually want it? Like the guy's attractive, like what if it's not that bad after all? And what if it blesses you with the fruits, a child that links you through blood to an incredibly powerful
immortal demigod
tradition of colonial wealth and power, and in this case literal eternal life. And that's how I looked at it, and that's why I thought the tincture was like more interesting as like a mixture that would induce miscarriage, because I was like, oh yeah, and then like, and that's how you get out, right?
It breaks off the connection. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, yeah, if you want to look at this thematically, like there's definitely some meat to it. It's definitely in there. It's just like, at the end of the day, it's just a clever metaphor for, colonialism is bad. And it's like, yeah, I kind of knew that already.
It is interesting too, because it, through the understandings of sexuality and the mixed messages you get about consent, does a lot of demystifying sort of colonial occupation, which I think is a little unintuitive for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's good and interesting and a fun place to take it, but I don't think it goes far enough. I think that it's like, like, let's talk about Francis shortly, okay?
Yeah.
So Francis is a very strange character to me. Because just as colonialism can manifest in the square-jawed Virgil and his like overt sexual like dominance, you know, he's like, I am going to commit a crime against you right now, right?
Yeah.
So too can it manifest in this kid Francis, who is like victimized by the family, but he's also like evil. He's like legitimately an evil guy, but he's like this sort of weepy, like misunderstood, oh, well, I don't want to be a part of this, but is, you know, just as important to the family's continued propagation as you find out he's literally a vassal for the fucking big bad.
Yeah.
And through that mechanism, I think it does recognize that the sort of apologetic, like, oh man, sorry about colonialism, but you know, we are gonna gentrify the fuck out of this place, can be just as damaging as just like the overt evil of Virgil, or the hands-off manipulation of the Howard's generation.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of the message, or not the message, but strangely, if you're looking for like a character arc, Noemi doesn't have a huge one, but Francis is the one who learns that, like, yeah, being passive and allowing this evil to continue is just as bad as the evil itself, and the only way I can make things better is to burn the house down.
Yeah, and it is very interesting because I think the lingering question at the end of the thing is, has Francis changed, or does Francis have the capacity to stop it from happening again? What prevents him from...
Will he just spread the gloom?
Yeah, I mean, he's been breathing in these mushrooms for 1 billion years, just as, you know, beneficiaries of colonialism have been benefiting from it for billions of years, myself included, and I appreciate the benefits. Thank you, great-great-great-grandfather, for that $1 million. But despite the fact that he is kind of apologetic about his part in it, it is something that is intrinsic to his value system. And I think he's asking kind of the right question at the end, which is like, do I have the capacity for transformational change? And Noemi's answer is like, don't worry, it'll be fine. But it's like, this is going to be the hardest thing Francis has ever had to do. Like, he spat a good fucking game about being like, oh, my mother should have burned this place to the ground. But he was like seconds from literally just letting them like take his entire body and mind and shit.
It is really, you know, it's one of the other questions from the end of the book is like, would you like to see a sequel? What do you think that would be? Would you like to follow Francis and Noemi?
No.
And I gotta say, that would be one of the weirdest sequels, because I can't imagine it would involve any horror, it would be any supernatural elements. It would just be like this fish out of water tale about a guy, like, dealing with the ramifications of being part of a supernatural evil his entire life, and then trying to lead, like, a normal life dating the daughter of, like, a paint magnate. I'm like, that's... You know, it's not very often that sequels completely change genres, but now the more that we're talking about it, like...
Now I do want to see it.
I'd be interested. I would check it out. Like, I don't think I would be, like, super excited, like, on the edge of my seat for it, but I'm like, I'm curious. How are they going to handle this?
And it's interesting to hear the relationship between Francis and the relationship between Noemi and her family, because while her family isn't, like, killing babies in order to, you know, manifest immortal life, it's an insanely wealthy family with like a patriarch who's like, you have to remain a socialite, and like, it would really be good for us if you married to extend the paint fortunes.
Yeah.
And it's like, in many ways, Noemi's family is pressuring her to continue the lineage in the same way that Francis's was, at the sacrifice of her bodily autonomy, rather than Francis's literal body. So it would be, I guess I would want to see them go back to Mexico City and like maybe Francis be like, oh shit, this is just how everything is everywhere. In many places, it's less overt, it's less like mind control, but concentrated wealth still exists in a bunch of places.
Yeah.
And you are expected to maintain certain social conditions in order to ensure that you don't lose it. And I don't know. It's a weird place to be for Francis. It's a weird place to be for Noemi. I don't know. It's
and you know what's interesting now that I think about it, and they didn't even touch on this, but it's like, yeah, her dad is a paint magnate. I keep using that word magnate. That means like an industrialist, right? Like he owns a big paint empire.
Yeah.
And it's like 1950s paint.
It had lead in it.
Probably full of lead. Yeah. Like, as much as they want to praise her father for, like, he picked himself up from his bootstraps and he made something, he's nouveau rich.
Making a living selling poison.
Yeah. Unintentionally selling poison. So it's like, maybe we're not too different, you and I. Or maybe that's the sequel where they're like, colonialism may be over, but patriarchy is still here.
Yeah. It's it is an interesting position to be in, and let's not forget the original thrust of why he wants her to check on Catalina is like, I want to see if she's okay. I think the man that she married is of poor stock, and like he's not good enough for her and not wealthy enough for her. It's like he ends up being evil, so it's okay that you said that, but that's fucked up. Like,
it's fucked up, man. What the hell?
It is strange that like the impetus for the entire story is like obey the whims of your paint magnate father, or else we are going to control your bodily autonomy and prevent you from learning. And then she goes to the other place and they're like, oh, we have to obey the whims of our silver magnate father, or else he will control our bodies literally.
And then she's like, that's evil. I gotta burn. See, if they have a sequel, it has to end with her burning down the paint factory. Otherwise, it's not justice.
And the lead gets into the air and they all die. No, but I would have liked to have seen that dichotomy explored a little more. I think the parallels between kind of Francis as an unwitting member of this and Noemi as an unwilling member of this they're interesting because they approach them from different directions, but the two of them are going to have to, as a couple, transform in a very foundational way in order to improve things, and who knows if that is going to happen or not.
All right, so getting away from the more metaphorical, high-minded stuff, there is one more sort of genre thing I wanted to talk about, and that's the idea of Gothic horror. Because, I mean, it's in the title. It's Mexican Gothic. And afterwards, I was looking up and I was like, what actually is Gothic horror? Like, I had a very vague idea of, like, it probably involves, like, castles and vampires and stuff, right? But I didn't know, and I'm curious, are you familiar with what defines Gothic horror?
It's just like, ghosts and shit, right?
So yeah, that's kind of what I thought. But okay, so the title Gothic horror refers specifically to Gothic architecture, things like old mansions and specifically castles. It started in this like post-Middle Ages, a little post-Renaissance, around the time of Frankenstein and Dracula and everything, where you had middle-class people finally starting to emerge into society and finding the remnants of like this old, more brutal society still standing around. Like, castles represent the fact that like monarchy used to dominate this land, everyone used to be serfs or slaves, and those ghosts are still hanging around here. Sometimes as literal ghosts, sometimes as like literal buildings that are still dotting the landscape, but more in a general way of like, the past is affecting the future, and you're going to have to deal with their problems, their sins coming down on you. And in that sense, this is like the definition of a Gothic horror, right? It's the previous generation's problems spilling over into the future, haunting this world with all their mistakes.
Well, although Howard is like 500 years old, so he's not a ghost so much as he's still there.
He's technically a ghost haunting the body of his grandkid or something.
Yeah, he's a fucking weird guy. And, the gloom is pretty much entirely ghosts. It's 99%
it's just a
ghosts.
bunch of... it's one of those, and this is a little tangent, but I hate that, like, it's another thing where someone read about mycelial networks and was like, oh man, this would be perfect for some weird science fiction concept.
I mean, they are weird. There's a reason everyone thinks this. They're like,
Yeah.
oh man.
Maybe it's just me. I'm just talking, like, after, like, Resident Evil 4 was like, did you know that mushrooms can control your brain? And then Star Trek was like, did you know mushrooms can communicate faster than light? What if we could use them to teleport? What if there's a consciousness in there? What if that's like another goddamn mycelial network? It just feels like a weird scientific hokey explanation for, like, you could have just had it be Ghost. I would have accepted Ghost.
It didn't have to be mushrooms, yeah.
But no. It's so looking into it, it was really interesting to be like, yeah, Gothic horror, if that's how it's defined, then this is like, the poster child for Gothic horror. Which then makes me think, like, did she come up with the title first and then just write the story to fit?
I feel like...
That's a very small nitpick. It just feels a little lazy to be like, what if I had a Gothic horror set in Mexico?
Yeah, okay.
Mexican Gothic.
I am glad we are talking about the title. The title sucks so fucking bad. It's literally just like, oh man, check this shit out.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it says on the tin. They should have named it Francis's Big Adventure.
I don't know what else you would call it or whatever, but it strikes me as being like, if you named something like Belgian horror movie or like Australian action movie, like, yeah, I mean that defines it, but it feels a little lazy. I guess it is memorable, but that brings me to the other part of that thing, the title, right? The Mexican part. Why did that sound so bad the way I said it?
Oh, the Mexican part, huh?
We need to talk about how Mexican this is. But no, I feel like it's almost worth bringing up because at least to me, it didn't feel very Mexican. It didn't feel like there was a whole lot of, like, Mexican culture or heritage. The setting could have easily been in, like, the backwoods of Virginia with, like, a rich European family taking over. And I don't think it would have changed a whole lot. Or, like, it could have taken place in India and have an English, high place there. Like, there wasn't really a whole lot of Mexico that, like, filtered in. And I'm almost a little disappointed because I was kind of hoping for more, like, cultural elements to be involved.
Yeah, with the exception of, like, going to the town below the high place once... And the opening scene where she completely embarrasses her date. He gets fucked up. What a moron. He's a dummy. What is it? Hugo Duarte? Fuck that guy.
Oh, I don't know.
With the exception of those, it does take place entirely within this thing and within the high place. And you are right. It is kind of like Mexico exists just as a contrast to Europe. Like, oh, this is the not Europe. This is the non-Europe, Yeah. It's supposed to represent normalcy in kind of the face of this, like, suffocating, weird politeness. But in doing so, yeah, really...
It's like they call it Mexican Gothic, and then you spend all your time in a European mansion.
Yeah,
dealing with non-Mexican people.
I really didn't think about it that way, but it is strange that it's like, yeah, this whole book's about, like, blood quantum and, like, the strength of the lineage or whatever, but they spend, like, 10 pages total talking about anything involving the title character's, like, lineage or childhood or relationship with Mexico or how it differs from this. It's just like, oh, things aren't like this back at my house. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. These people are demons. Like, you go to a different European place, I bet it's not like this.
Now that I think about it, maybe that's what the tincture was supposed to represent. Maybe that was them bringing a little bit of Mexico because it comes from the, like...
Yeah, from, like, a traditional source of knowledge.
Yeah, like a traditional healer, and she gives them this weird mixture of stuff.
She also shows up once and then never again. I was like, come on. This is I love
twice.
This character. She did show up twice, yeah.
And she gives little cigarettes for the saints.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I guess, like, the Revolution, I'm like, the Revolution plays a role, and I'm like, it really doesn't. Like,
No.
it is a thing that happens and causes like the mind link of the workers to be a little separated from the high place, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
Like the specifics of it or the political outcomes do not matter to these completely isolated people, only insofar as their workers are less attentive.
Yeah, I kept waiting for them to give like a little bit more because I'm like, oh, what revolution was this exactly? Because my Mexican history is a little spotty, and I kept waiting for them to mention like, what was there a figure involved? What was there a year this happened? But no, they just a couple times the revolution happened, and then the mine was never the same.
Wait,
I don't know how exactly.
Am I fucking stupid? They're just talking about like the Mexican Revolution, right?
I don't know.
Like it would have to be. Like I assumed in absence of them talking too much about specifics, I'm like, oh, they're just talking about like the Mexican Revolution.
I mean, that's the thing is like I don't actually know anything about like Mexican history. I just know it belonged to the Spanish, and then at some point they got independence.
Yeah, so it was like in the early 1900s, and honestly, it's exactly like ours.
Oh, okay. Well, who's there, George Washington?
That's a great question. Now I'm gonna think about who was there, George Washington.
Yeah, we'll have to either way, we're getting very off topic, but it's fun to think about these little things. Again, as much as we nitpicked the book, it gave us more than an hour's worth of discussion, and we had a fun time.
Yeah. Again, I did like the book, and I think a significant amount of my sort of problems with it were that it was too surface level, that it did not leave enough to the reader to kind of discover themselves, that there was a lot of, I don't want to be like there was a lot of cash left on the table, but there's a lot of, I wish there were like longer, more intricate conversations between characters, between like Francis and Noemi, and Catalina does and says very little throughout the entirety of this. The only guys we get any sort of understanding with are Virgil, who is evil, in a very specific way, but also does represent kind of the heir to this sort of conqueror's mentality, despite the fact that at the end it's revealed his motivations are wholly separate from his from the patriarchs, and that he is attempting to change things and wrest power from him.
It is really interesting. I didn't think about it until now, but if Francis kind of represents this like almost liberal mindset of like, well, I feel really bad, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Virgil kind of represents at the end this conservative mindset of like, yeah, the elites are bad. I should be the elites. I should be in charge of everything.
Yeah.
Where they don't realize the system is bad. They just wish they were at the top of it.
Yeah, and I would have liked to have seen Virgil as a maybe more sympathetic, less rapey guy who explore like that concept and idea is fundamentally flawed, of course, and Virgil's evil should be the focus of a lot of this work, but I wish it was less clear. It's like, oh yeah, this is the evil guy because he likes sexual assault. Right.
Yeah.
But I wish his moments of desperation where he's like, I can fix this, we can be friends, we will improve everything, weren't also bookmarked by, and I hate brown people. It's like, oh, man. I love to do sexual assault. It's like he represents, an alternative to the patriarch's view that is similarly bad and represented in normal people.
Like, there's literally that part at the end where he's like, Francis, join me. Together we could kill our father, and then we could do sexual assault together.
It's like, okay, buddy.
We can share the women.
Also, like, who the fuck wants to do sexual anything with their brother? Come on, I know it's the incest family, but how does he think that's going to be a selling point?
This is the internet, MBT.
Ugh.
People will sexualize anything.
It is interesting. I guess what I wanted was more nuance, more of an exploration of kind of the underlying themes of the work, and less just telling me what it means.
Yeah.
And I think we could have gotten that if it was longer. It's like a short read, or more deliberate, especially in the early parts. But the end result is still cool. I still did like it. I thought it was neat. The stuff at the end, like when it becomes a thriller, it's a real page turner.
Yeah, you really want to get through everything, and yeah, kind of going with what I said before, where it's like, yeah, it doesn't succeed at either element super well, But that's because, like, it left me wanting more, right? Like, I either wish that it had more of this, more stuff to say about the topics it was talking about, or I wish that it, you know, if it didn't have that, it should have been scarier. It should have been... I think I went into this because it was Halloween and because it's called Mexican Gothic, expecting something to be a lot more frightening, a lot more horror-related. It wasn't Gothic enough and it wasn't Mexican enough. Put that on the back cover. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have suggestions for next year, other new horror. Again, we want to try to get away from the old horror stuff. So if you've got some new suggestions for us, new books to read, I would love to check more of those out.
Please, God. I don't want to read another compilation.
Yeah.
Oh.
So put those down.
We were going to do Goosebumps this year. That's where we were.
We were close to it. Either way, thank you for joining me, MBT. I appreciate you coming on to this tiny-ass channel to talk about books that I'm sure no one cares about.
I had fun. Thank you for having me.
As always. So until next time, good luck.
And have leg.